Hi, my name is Cheryl and I'm a very late diagnosed autistic woman. Today I would like to talk about PTSD because PTSD is a really big deal. Unlike some of the characteristics and traits of autism that can prove to be very challenging to us, PTSD can be absolutely devastating. And from the time that we're traumatized to the time that we heal can sometimes take a lifetime, which is not real encouraging, but I'm about to explain why that is. First, I'd like to make 4 key points. Number 1, 40%, up to 40% of people on the autism spectrum have the symptoms of PTSD or CPTSD, which is complex PTSD. And in a minute, I'll tell you the difference between the two. Number 2, because some of the symptoms of ASD and PTSD overlap, there can be a misdiagnosis or a delayed diagnosis of one or both. Number 3, because we have so many sensory and emotional sensitivities, we can develop PTSD more quickly than neurotypical people, and as a result of experiences that neurotypical people might not even find traumatizing. And number 4, when a person on the spectrum has PTSD, it truly can take a very long time to heal. Let's look at PTSD versus CPTSD. PTSD usually happens as a result of one event, for example, a car accident or an act of violence. Complex PTSD is a result of repeated events or prolonged events. For example, childhood abuse, whether it be emotional, physical, or sexual, or childhood neglect, or, believe it or not, being a prisoner of war. Those are all lumped in together. Now, both of them result in physiological responses, for example, flashbacks, hypervigilance, avoidance, but CPTSD has a couple of additional symptoms such as amnesia and dissociation, an altered self-perception. For example, we feel permanently damaged or we feel guilt and shame, and we have altered relationships in the sense that we have a hard time trusting other people. And for whatever reason, and I looked this up, I couldn't find anything on it, but we do tend to be more vulnerable to being re-victimized. As an aside, I'd like to give you a few quick facts about childhood sexual abuse. 20 to 30% of neurotypical children are victims of sexual abuse, compared to autistic children who are 3 to 4 times more likely than neurotypical children to experience it. 40 to 50% of autistic adults report being sexually traumatized as a child. Sexual abuse happens more commonly in females. Normally it happens between ages 7 and 13, and the survivors are more vulnerable to re-victimization. Now, like I said, I'm going to show you a little chart here so that you can look at the symptoms of each, PTSD and ASD, and how they overlap. Because some of the symptoms of PTSD and ASD overlap, there can be confusion over what a person is experiencing, and there can be delayed diagnosis or misdiagnosis, and that makes sense when you look at these symptoms. But I'd like you to particularly pay attention to the PTSD and ASD specific traits in addition to the ones that overlap. Now, why is that important? Personally, I think that if you get an early enough autism diagnosis, then you can have supports in place that can actually eliminate or reduce the chances of you being traumatized in the first place. Now, why is PTSD so hard to heal in autistic people? Well, in this book, I'll show you, I just started reading this because a commenter on YouTube, Miguelito, suggested reading it. He said it was really helpful to him. So I read this and oh my goodness, have you ever read things where you think, no, that's not me? And then other things where you think, oh my gosh, I could have written this. It's like I wrote this. That's how I feel about this book. It says that our innate characteristics as autistic people make PTSD worse. And when we have PTSD, it causes our autism symptoms to be worse. Talk about a vicious cycle and a snowball effect. So which autistic traits are the culprits? Which ones cause the most problems? Number 1, perseveration. When I read that word, it almost sounded optimistic, like, yeah, we can persevere. But It's not us that's persevering, it's our negative thoughts. The dictionary definition is and I'm going to put it right here, and I want to focus on every word, continual, involuntary, and intrusive repetition of a thought. Now, this falls, believe it or not, under the diagnostic criteria of restricted and repetitive behaviors. They can be internal or external. So can you imagine having the same triggering thought over and over and not having the ability to turn them off? I mean, that is like the definition of hell, in my opinion. So in addition, our brains don't know the difference between what's happening now and what we're imagining. And so that's why we have those same physiological responses every time. Our nightmares are more lucid due to our brains that think in pictures. Personally, when I ruminate, which is kind of the same thing as perseverance, I ruminate in pictures. I can see things. So, I hate that. Constant reliving of trauma can cause emotional chaos in people like us who already struggle identifying and understanding emotions in the first place. Our strong emotions become overwhelming very quickly, which can lead to meltdown. In this book, which I highly recommend, this is What Happened to You. I found this when I literally Googled, what is wrong with me? It came up and I devoured this book. I highly recommend it, by Oprah and Dr. Bruce Perry. But in this book, Dr. Bruce Perry says that emotional dysregulation, which is when we don't know what to do with all of the feelings that we're feeling, is the number one cause of substance abuse, which totally makes sense because these feelings they lead to meltdowns. They're horrible. And if people can numb those, that's why they do it. Number 5, PTSD symptoms are made worse by the underlying ever-present anxiety that we all have as autistic people. Number 6, people on the spectrum don't often reach out for help. Why? I'll tell you why. Because we feel that others may not understand our PTSD. My ex-boyfriend literally said to me one day, and I'm not bashing him because he just doesn't understand, and this is how most people are, but he had the news on and something came on and I said, oh gosh, can you just turn that off? And he said, it's just the news. And then when I told him I had PTSD, he said, that's for soldiers. So, I mean, he just really had a very limited knowledge of what it was, which most people do. Neurotypical people might not see the event that we feel and perceive as traumatic. And we know that because we're smart enough to know. Also, we don't want to say it out loud because it can re-traumatize ourselves. As a result, we never process the trauma, and therefore it lasts until we heal it, which can be, in my case, I'm still dealing with it, and I was traumatized when I was 8. Now, Dr. Bruce Perry gives a really great explanation of PTSD, and so does Dr. Tori Olds. They explain it so well, and I'm serious. Understanding it is really helpful. So I'm going to give you another little visual here. Basically, the cortex is the thinking part of our brain. It also keeps track of time, the past, present, and future. Now, when we're in a calm state, input from our senses enters the lower part of the brain, you can see it down there, and makes its way to the top. But when we're triggered, stress shuts down the cortex. And with no sense of time, and without being able to think and reason, it feels like the threat is happening now. And we have the same physiological responses as when it happened. Now remember, we have perseveration. We live moments in pictures. So we're triggered over and over. We feel traumatized over and over and over. For me, understanding why I have PTSD and how PTSD works has been really helpful in relieving some of my embarrassment over my reactions to triggers and my shame. But honestly, I just would like it to be over and gone. But I don't know if that's ever going to happen. So I would like at least some coping skills to help control it when it happens. The last book I'm going to mention, but I don't have a picture of it, was mentioned by Chris and Debbie. If you don't watch them, they're awesome. But Chris mentioned a book called The Autism Survival Guide to Therapy. So in order for your PTSD to be healed and for it to go away forever, you have to have a therapist, which is very rare, that knows about ASD and autism and can address both of them at the same time, and they know how they interact and kind of play off of each other. So let me know if this video spoke to you. I know it was a little longer, so thanks for hanging in there with me. If you got value out of it, think about liking and subscribing, hitting that like thumb, and let me know your experiences. I'm looking forward to your comments. As always, I learned so much from you, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Why does my phone turn on without me pressing the button?